Hello and welcome back to the Ash and Stone channel. My name is Chris and today I'm going to show you how I'm painting my Oathmark Light Infantry as Militia. First up, I combine the plastic kit with some 3D printed bodies from Wargames Atlantic. It adds a bunch of variety to the unit and stretches the box a little further, using up the extra heads and arms you would normally have left over. Adding the accessories included in the plastic kit like knives, pouches and scabbards really ties the 3D printed bodies in with the rest of the plastic kit. Because I intend to use a lot of brighter colours on this unit, I prime in grey. Starting with Vallejo basic skin tone, I paint the heads and hands of each of the figures. It takes a couple of coats to build up a solid colour, but when I'm happy, I use Army Painter Flesh Wash to wash the areas of skin, to shade them and make the details pop. That'll take a little while to dry, so shifting gears, I grab some Vallejo Sky Grey and paint the exposed shirt on the first figure. And using Vallejo Dark Sand, paint the exposed shirt on the fourth figure. A little Army Painter Soft Tone is used to shade the dark sand. While that dries, I use a spot of black to mark out the figure's eyes with a careful horizontal stroke. And then, with white, I carefully dot in the whites of the eyes. While I've got the white out, I highlight the exposed grey shirt of the first figure, and then use dark sand to highlight the shirt of the fourth. Then it's time to go in with the basic skin tone again and hit the highlights of the skin. Nose, cheeks, chin, upper lip, basically anywhere that light will hit when coming down from above, leaving the wash in the recesses and the shaded skin as a mid-tone. Now I head on to the figure's clothing. I want to go for a really bright and varied palette so that each of the models sticks out as an individual and the unit as a whole is a riot of colours. So I grab a variety of bright colours, yellows and greens and blues and reds and almost everything in between, and I mix and match them on the models, trying to ensure that none of the models are wearing the same thing. I block out the colours on each of the 5 figures to make sure that I've got that variety, before applying a second coat to make sure the colours are even. A wet palette really comes into its own here, as it keeps the paint hydrated and ready to use for a long period of time. You don't need anything fancy. A plastic container, a damp paper towel, and a bit of non-stick baking paper is more than sufficient. Once the base colours are looking good, I go in and hit each with an appropriate wash. Army Painter Soft Tone for the yellows, tans and oranges, green tone on the greens, red tone for the reds, and blue tone for, surprisingly enough, the blues. The blue tone is very strong on the ice blue I use for the middle figure's tunic, so I cut it with a little water to thin it out and make it a little softer. When the wash is all dry, I go through and reapply the base colour, leaving the wash in the recesses, and then mix in a little of a lighter colour to make a highlight to pick out the high points. The colour used depends on the base. For cooler colours like the emerald or the blue, I'll mix in a little Vallejo Silver Grey, whereas the warmer colours like the greens and the reds work better with something like Vallejo Dark Sand or Iraqi Sand. To give the figures a little more punch, I go through and add decoration to their clothing. Painting trim around the hems and necklines of the tunics or the edges of cloaks is a great way to add a little more pop to the models with minimal effort. Other simple options included adding dots and basic patterns, or adding patches of colour to shoulders and elbows. The sky is the limit really. With the clothing sorted, out comes the chocolate brown to hit all of the areas of leather. Boots, belts, braces and pouches. And even some of the hair. Because I'm using a grey undercoat, they all need a second layer to build the colour up a little more. Then, in the usual fashion, I add a highlight of Vallejo Flat Earth to the areas that would see the most wear. Mainly edges, or the toes of boots, and other areas that will flex and rub. The dark sand comes out again and is used sparingly to hit the areas of leather that have been rubbed through the outer surface and dye to the raw leather beneath. This works especially well on the toes of boots, edges of the braces, ends of belts, and on pouch flaps and bottoms. Vallejo beige brown is used to paint the handles of the axe and mace, and also to base some of the lighter brown here. I vary the colour I use for the wood throughout the rest of the unit to add another layer of variation to their equipment using darker browns and beiges. The wood is highlighted with Vallejo green brown, which is applied in long thin strokes along the shaft to hint at wood grain. I then use Army Painter's strong tone to wash all of the areas of leather and wood. This performs double duty, adding shading to those areas, as well as helping to tie the varying colours together. I use Vallejo Iraqi sand to paint the bollock dagger handle and the cloth that hangs from the back of the helmet on a few of the figures, as well as to highlight the light brown hair. Vallejo silver grey is used, either as the base layer such as on this figure's facial here, or as a highlight colour on a darker base to add streaks of grey to a figure's hair, making the militia look older than the other models in the army. Army Painter's soft tone is applied as a wash over the brown hair, dark and light, to shade the light and to tone down and blend the silver grey into the darker base a little more. It's a little bit stark on its own. It's also used to shade the helmet flap and bollock dagger handle. I use a touch of white to highlight the silver grey moustache, silver fox, and then go back in with the Iraqi sand to highlight the bollock dagger handle and the helmet flap. With that, I head on to the metallics and apply a base of black to all of the areas of metal, as well as the sword scabbard. Vallejo black grey is used to highlight that scabbard, and then Vallejo steel is used as a base for all of the areas of bright steel, so the swords and scabbard and sheath fittings. Vallejo natural steel is my paint of choice for steel that will be darker and unpolished, and is what I use on the axe head and helmets. To base the bronze mace head, I use Citadel Warplock bronze. Army Painter dark tone is used to shade and tarnish all of the areas of bright steel, swords and fittings, and Army Painter grim black speed paint is used on all of the areas of natural steel to give a forge blackened finish to the axe and helmets. The models are then given a blast with Tamiya flat clear to seal the paint job and remove any unwanted shine. After giving that some time to dry, I come back in with the Vallejo steel and hit areas of metal that will be polished and bright, such as the swords, edge of the axe and the various fittings, and I also take the time to add scuffs and chips to the edges of the helmets and axe head, and then the helmets are finished off with a light dry brush of steel, which just helps to add to that scuffed appearance. Throughout the rest of the unit, I've used various techniques on the helmets, giving them an array of finishes, from painted to polished to forge blackened, to further push that feeling of a group of individuals rather than a cohesive uniformed unit. To finish off the mace head, it's given a dry brush of Vallejo bright bronze to pick out the details and give it a little shine. And now I can think about basing. I give the tops of the bases a rough coat of black, as the grout to follow works better over a darker base. That's followed with a little bit of glue and a dip in the mixture of grout and soil. When that's dry, the rims can be painted black, 2 coats to ensure it's even, and static grass is added using my static grass contraption. If you want to know more about that, check out the linked video. The bases are finished off with some tufts and a little Woodland Scenics fine turf, and then everything is stuck down with a mixture of glue and water. If you add a little liquid soap to the mix, it'll soak into the basing materials and adhere much stronger. The shields that come with the kit are fantastic, but being quite tatty, I thought I might get better use out of them with the undead, and so I need to replace them here. I designed and 3D printed some replacements, aiming for a smaller, transitionary or experimental style, with again a bit of variety. These were painted up in varying states of completion, and are attached with a little super glue. And there we go, 5 more models completed. Here's the unit so far, and I think you'll agree they add a splash of colour to the table, but the shields are enough to tie them together with the rest of the human models. The files for the shields are available to my patrons over on Patreon. Thank you all very much for your support. I do hope that this video has been helpful or given you some ideas, and we will see you all next time. Cheers!